You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Its purpose is to dissect horror films, both old and new. Those that have been listening to the current season know that we've been dedicating it to the late, great Wes Craven in what we called the Nightmare Years, and we've sandwiched that with the very first Nightmare on Elm Street film. And we had ended the Wes Craven discussions, at least, on Wes Craven's New Nightmare. It seemed only fitting that because it was generated around the Nightmare on Elm Street that we should interject that with conversations around the franchise as well. And that's why we started to look at A Nightmare on Elm Street and all the films that involved within that franchise, which brings us to the very last episode of our podcast for this season, looking at what was the remake, A Nightmare on Elm Street, which actually was released in 2010 and just celebrated its 10-year anniversary. So interesting to see, and probably quite topical to kind of have a chat around that movie, because it's quite taboo, I have to say. Like we'll put that straight out there. A lot of contention around it, a lot of naysayers, and I guess we'll dive into that as we go through the plot narrative and the discussions of the podcast itself. I'm waffling on a little bit, so I should probably introduce myself. I'm the lead host and of the podcast. My name is Sol Muerte, and I am joined, as always, for the Nightmare on Elm Street discussions by Oscar Jack. Welcome aboard, Oscar.
It's good to be here for this final little chapter for now.
For now. That's I like the way you said that. It keeps getting banned around like this. There's still loose talk of reopening that, and I guess I will ask that question of each other at the end of the podcast of whether it should be reawakened or not. But yeah, so I you know the drill by now. I always ask of my podcast host assistants, what do they remember when they first watched the movie and what their initial reaction was of it. So I'll pass that over to you.
Yeah, a bit of a funny one with that is that I hadn't actually seen it until I was rewatching them all earlier in the year for this retrospective. And as I was kind of mentioning, I was talking to an old friend of mine, someone who I went to film school with 10 years ago. I was saying how I was watching the remake and I'd never seen it. And he just kind of looked at me and was like, yeah, you did. We went and saw it in the cinema. And I was like, oh, no. which didn't particularly bode well, because I'm generally not the kind of person to forget seeing a movie, particularly in the cinema. But I just didn't have a recollection of seeing this one. But I saw it in the cinema on the big screen.
And no recollection of it.
And no recollection.
That's
no.
Right there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, that says a lot in of itself. I guess, like, I'll talk to my side of things. Like, I know I definitely didn't see it in the cinemas when it came out. I think, and this, unfortunately, this may steer where my head's going with the listeners out there of my opinion of the movie, because I was so in love with the Nightmare on Elm Street films, and more so Robert Englund's portrayal of Freddy Krueger, that I kind of had that very snobbish approach of coming into this film saying, no, I'm not going to watch that. Why would I watch that? You know, no one will ever be Freddy Krueger. Robert Englund is Freddy Krueger. No one else can be it. And in all fairness, I actually really like the actor who played him, Jackie Earle Haley. He's an awesome actor.
Yes.
And so that coming from somebody that's a fan of character actors, and knowing that he's probably one of the better ones of recent years, I found that difficult, because I was like, I could see how his method would be coming into this film. And so I was still intrigued about seeing his adaptation regardless. So yeah, I was presented with a conundrum, but the former side of that equation, it won out, and so I didn't actually see it in the cinemas. Is my point. I didn't get to see it until, I want to say, when it came out on one of the pay TV channels, did like a big stunt on the Nightmare on Elm Street films, and that's when I finally got around to watching it. So it would have been a few years after the cinema release that I actually finally caught it. So yeah, I'm going to reserve my judgment of what I thought of the film because I think that's going to come out in the wash as we kind of get into the blood and guts of it. So, and we may as well get stuck in. Let's get stuck in. Let's get knee deep. Let's get dirty with this because, yeah, let's face it. It's we can't skirt around the elephant in the room without kind of just starting to kind of dissect this one. So which is what we do. So listeners who are new to our podcast, this is what we tend to do. We tend to just go through the narrative of the film, and along the way we may kind of deviate and discuss things left, right and center just to kind of get the idea of our thoughts and reactions of the time when we're watching it. Not always that formula that we go to, but in this case we are going to go down that road. So and what I should preface this with is this definitely goes from the approach of trying to tell Freddy's side of the story in this, which we've never really had done. Arguably, Freddy's Dead opened up that can of worms a little bit, but in this instance, we're kind of getting this almost from the get-go of the mystery that surrounds Freddy Krueger as the person along the way. And look, maybe this is a point of me to say this too, because it seems like with the remakes, that's been a bit of a growing trend. That's been the approach that they've come to the slashers. You know, we saw with mind blank. Sorry. We saw with Halloween, the Rob Zombie movies, that the very first one of those was very much about, the mindset of who is Michael Myers and why he is the way he is. And in a way, the Friday the 13th movie did that a little bit at the beginning of that one for the remake from memory. And then Texas Chainsaw Massacre maybe didn't so much until we got, so not the remake. So there's been a few kind of reinstallments of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. With the remake that was 2003 off the top of my head or something like that with Jessica Biel. That didn't really touch on the background of it, but the sequel, which was a prequel that happened called Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning. Obviously, the title itself says that it goes back to how he was born. So it seems like, and this has been a bit of a chagrin of mine, is that I like the mystery that surrounds these slashers. I don't need to go into the detail of why they are the way they are. We just take it on face value that they are evil the embodiment of evil, I should say.
Yes.
And
they're forces of nature.
They are, yeah. If we use the Halloween kind of example, with Sam Loomis talking about Michael Myers, he said he's pure evil. There's no, he's been a doctor for years and he's never come across somebody that he describes as literally the essence of what evil is. And this is what these slashers are. These slasher icons should be. They should be evil personified. They should evoke fear. And I feel like lately filmmakers have been trying to get into the mystery and the ethos that surrounds figures, and they're kind of missing the point. It shouldn't be about that. And anyway, so that's where we're coming into this. So obviously, I'm giving a slight hint as to where my thoughts landed in the end up of this film. Okay, so let's look at how it opens up. We open up the film inside a diner, and we have this girl who's working there, and we also have this character called Chris, played by Katie Cassidy. People may know Katie her from a lot of films actually. Like she's been a bit of a who's who, especially in the horror scene as well. Like she's a bit of a modern scream queen, to kind of say the least. But I think she initially cropped up in film wise anyway in When a Stranger Calls.
Yes.
Saw her in not the recent Black Christmas remake, but a version of Black Christmas in
as well as
2000s.
Taken.
And Taken, yes, that's right.
I believe she's the titular Taken.
Yeah, that's it.
If I remember correctly. Yeah.
She also played Sharon Tate in Wolves at the Door, which is probably a forgettable movie of the Sharon Tate brothers. And yeah, so that's kind of been it for the film circuits. But obviously in TV land, she's been like Harper's Island, which was one of those kind of serial killer kind of stunt kind of things that was on. She's probably more well known as playing the Black Canary in the Arrow kind of DC franchise on TV, as well as cropping up in Legends of Tomorrow and things like that. So yeah, that people may know her more from that world of recent years. So anyway, we see her at the beginning. So she's in this diner. We also meet this guy called Dean, and he falls asleep at the dining room table. At which point he meets a man who's covered in burn scars, wearing a red and green sweater, and has the claw glove on his hand, which we obviously know is Freddy. The burn man cuts Dean's throat in the dream, but in reality it appears that Dean is cutting his own throat. So we have this whole kind of, he's sort of awake, not awake. He's not, he's drinking lots of coffee. He's obviously been at the diner a lot, trying to stay awake in the early hours. And he does this in front of his friend, who is, which will turn out to be our lead heroine, who is Nancy, played by Rooney Mara. And yeah, that's our opening sequence. So what do we think of that as like our opening introduction to the world of the new world of Freddy?
I quite like it. I quite like it as an opening. Yeah. I like the jumping in, and this character Dean is like towards the end of being awake for God knows how many days. That he's like just piling on the coffee in this place, and that it's a really stylish, I think a really stylish opening scene.
It's really nicely shot from memory as well. Like there's a lot of a lot of greens and reds in the
lighting is striking.
Lighting, which was kind of cool. I liked that. And yeah, sorry, I spoke over you, but yes, I kind of like that too. So anyway, carry on. You were saying that.
No, it's I think it steps you into a really a good foot to kind of step into the film with. Particularly with this, it kind of takes elements, where we've had diners be kind of set pieces, but not really used in this way. It kind of would make sense, because diners. But particularly with those kinds of diners that are open 24 hours a day in these small towns, like where it's a place that a kid can go and an adult movie kid can go and kind of try and keep themselves away. I think it makes a lot of sense, and kind of raises my hopes up a little bit with this film. And I think the death is good. I think it's
I agree. Yeah, because it kind of, I guess it takes on that whole image of where, from the perception of the person that's not been introduced to who Freddy is yet, you just see it as this guy who's on the brink of despair and, at his wit's end and obviously troubled, and could easily be passed as a suicide event, not realizing that it's this entity that lives in the dream world, so... It was really nice. I agree with you. I thought it was a really nice kind of opener to the film. And Freddy at this point is still mysterious enough for it to kind of work, I think. We don't really see him. And yeah, Yeah, so I think it comes across really nicely. So then the next scene takes place at Dean's funeral. So this is where we kind of start getting to meet the rest of the characters that will play the part of the sequence of events that will unfold. We see that's right. We see the Chris character, Katie Cassidy, sees a photo of her and Dean as children, but she kind of starts questioning it because, like, she has no memory of who Dean was as a child. She only knows him from high school, so she's like, I don't get it. Where did that photo come from? So she's starting to kind of think things were a bit sus, and she actually starts to then begin to dream about this burned figure, which is Freddie, and so she then starts to refuse to go to sleep and has it in her head that she's going to die if she does. We also meet Jesse, played by Thomas Dekker, and he is basically Chris's ex-boyfriend, but he has something of a bit of a history. So, like, we don't actually get to know what actually happened there, but there's something that's troubled him at this stage. So, and so we kind of get introduced to him in this point. And I'm just trying to remember what. Oh yeah, that's right. He played John Connor, didn't he, in Terminator: Sarah Connor Chronicles, among other things. But yeah, he. That's where I knew him from. And so Jessie basically shows up at Chris's house to keep her company while she sleeps. But it's Chris that actually then starts to dream again, meeting the burned man in her dreams, and she is murdered in her sleep. So this then I guess is a bit reminiscent of the Tina death scene at this point. So, like, replaying the whole boyfriend in the bedroom and being accused of murdering her. I guess and also I guess there's a bit of a Scream element at play here. And what I mean by that is the very first Scream where we see the death of Drew Barrymore. So we have Katie Cassidy, who, as we mentioned, is a bit of a Scream queen in her own right, but she gets killed off quite early. So that in itself is a good shift, I felt, with like going, oh, okay, so this isn't the person we're going to be following. Because initially you think she is going to be. Did you get that impression? Or Yeah, absolutely. With just the kind of perspective that we've kind of been sticking with her for the opening, and like the thing with this movie gets started really quickly. Yes, it does.
Like it really just like puts all of a sudden you're like, whoa, okay, the funeral scene, they're all together. It feels maybe like 10 minutes too fast. Then where it kind of that general kind of scene in the previous Elm Street movies has generally kind of sat, where everyone kind of wises to, for the most part. And but then we realized kind of more and more that this is, essentially a remake. Not necessarily a reboot. It's closer than than I think we'd kind of think going into it.
I agree.
That it is.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting because especially this part of it as well, and just to touch on what you were saying about it going really quite fast. Like, I was just checking the running time actually, and it's a 90-minute film, so that probably does lend weight to why it feels like it's going through quite quickly. And one wonders what could have been potentially done if they allowed for a little bit more room there in the book. And maybe that's something we'll touch on as we start getting closer to the end of the film plotline, because it does. I say that, but then the latter end of it does get quite weighty. So maybe it needed to kind of have that pace to draw us through to get us to the weighty end of it, I guess, is what I'm saying. So so we get the death scene of Chris, and it's He kind of waking up covered in blood and not able to explain what happened. And he runs and he turns up at Nancy's house. And so that's, as I said at the beginning, that's Rooney Mara's character. And she is actually going to be our heroine. Clues in the name, Nancy. And she's going to be our heroine, as I said, and he turns up at the house and basically says, look, it's not what it looks like. I didn't kill her. And he then mentions the name Freddy to her for the first time. And that's where we first hear the name Freddy, in fact. And then he kind of does a runner from her house, but he gets arrested by the police. And then he's then basically under suspicion for murdering Chris. And at which point, and again, this is very reminiscent of the first one too, because he ends up being killed in the jail as well. Although in this instance, it's not. In that one, the character dies by hanging himself. This one's a very different. I'm trying to remember how he dies now. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I remember it being different. Like he ends up being kind of killed, quite bloodily from memory. And so that's when Nancy starts also starting to get a bit suspicious because her friends are dying left, right, and centre. So she starts kind of trying to kind of connect up with people and work out what's going on. So, and she also pieces together that there's this thing about knowing each other before they were teenagers, the stuff that Chris was touching on. And it's eventually Nancy meets up with her friend Quentin. So he's the token Johnny Depp role in this, the boyfriend wannabe in this moment. And he, between the two of them, they discover that all of them actually, including more children that they haven't met yet, attended the same preschool together. And this is where Nancy starts to quiz her mum about it. It's like, what's going on? Like, you know, something doesn't add up here. How comes we knew each other? What are you hiding from us? You know, basically what the fuck's going on? So the mum's played by Connie Britton, by the way. And most people would probably know her from that. I can't even remember the name of it now, but the country freaking Nashville TV series as the lead kind of for a while, joint lead singer in that. And maybe outside of that, she did crop up in American Horror Story at one point as well. And I forget which one. I think it was the first season. They all blur a bit. The seasons but even though they're different in their own way, they just blur a bit as to what came when. But I think she was in the very first one. So Connie Britton plays the mum. I thought she was pretty good in this too, I have to say. And so but she's all very kind of, you know, cloak and dagger, kind of mysterious, not really letting on what actually occurred, other than to say that there was this gardener at the preschool named Fred Krueger, and he hurt Nancy and the rest of the kids. She explains, she does say at one point there that Nancy was his favorite, and he came home one day, and she came home, one day, telling her mum about Freddy's magic cave and the things that happened down there. So this is, I guess, the point I was saying earlier about this is where they start to unravel who Freddy Krueger was before he was in the dream world of Freddy. And she, so Gwen claims Krueger skipped town before he was arrested. Nancy doesn't actually believe this, though. There's some, it doesn't add up with Mum's story, and she attempts to track down the remaining kids from the school and find out what happened to them. And she eventually discovers that pretty much all of the other kids have been killed, most of them in their sleep. And so the dots are kind of forming together that there is this weird kind of thing that's happening. And we're joining her kind of story, and as she kind of unravels that and what's going on. At the same time, Quentin is also trying to accept that everything is nothing more than just kind of repressed memories that he has, and he's part of the swim prac team, and so he often kind of goes off and does that. And there's this moment where he actually falls asleep during the swim practice, and and this is what he actually has.
Very normal.
Yeah, isn't it? I just like gonna go for a swim, and I'm so tired.
Yeah, Freddy's not going to kill you if you fall asleep underwater.
Is that like a bit of is that meant to be a twist on the Nancy bath scene from the first one, though? Is that what they're...
No, because don't we get that in this movie? We get a Nancy bath,
we do.
I believe.
Yeah, I forgot that. Yes, but it's all a bit... That's all a bit swept really quickly, that one, though. It's not... doesn't have the same impact as the original. I felt, but yeah, I forgot. There you go. There's another thing. We're both forgetting things about this film. I at least I only forgot one scene, not the whole thing. Little dig there. Sorry. So look, So there's he's having a swim, falls asleep, as you do, and this is where he has a bit of an encounter. But he also in this gets these kind of flashbacks of who Freddy was, and
I really hate this.
and we kind of get the whole bit where he basically witnesses what happened to him, and that they hunted him down, and as the people, the parents, I should say, hunted him down, and basically kind of burnt him alive in his kind of this place that's in the middle of nowhere, and basically one of the lead kind of people behind that was Nancy's father, Quentin, and who played by Clancy Brown. Clancy Brown, come on.
Yeah, always happy seeing an eternal, an immortal.
I like what you did there. I like what you did there. The one bit where I was actually quite pleased in the film, I think. Anyway, so we get to see him, and the reality is that they basically murdered Kruger with no evidence that he committed the crime or any crime for that matter. It's all born out of hearsay, and at this point too, Nancy and Quentin also kind of believe that this is what's happened. This guy was innocent, and the parents kind of hunted him down, killed him, and that's why he's come back for revenge.
Nancy even says, like, I was a child, like, how could you, which is a really, like maybe an interesting, maybe that's quite interesting. It's because the parents are still kind of painted in this light of a kind of a similar tone as the original, where they're kind of like haunted and like there's a darkness around the parents, like a real kind of darkness where you kind of are like, oh, is this where we're going? That he's that he was this innocent guy, but also that they've already brought in the kind of heavy implication that he was a child molester. Which they maybe hinted at in the originals, but he was always way more strictly a child killer. Which is better. which is better.
Because then I guess that raises the question of who Freddy is, though, isn't it? Because because if he is meant to be evil, then being quite frank and upfront about it, being a molester rather than a killer is a way more ugly thing to do. So by that respect, he would be more evil, right?
It's gritty. This is in the era. This is in the thick of the gritty reboot. And it really is. It kind of is of the ilk of that kind of whole decade of taking something and making it dark and realistic. And just kind of making it a bit gross. And generally, what happens a lot of the time with that stuff is that they take a lot of the fun out. because the first movie, it's fun. I feel like, and speaking of how brisk it is, it's essentially the exact same running time as the original.
Right, there you go.
Yeah, so it's
But
yeah, I think
and here's the thing, and I do want to come back to. Actually, I'm going to put a pin in that for a second because I do want to come back to what you said you hated this bit. You know, when you were talking about the bit. So, can you just expand on that and tell me what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's okay. So, in principle, I like that they're divvying up the role of Nancy. They're making it a kind of a two-part, making it more of a mystery that needs more kind of hands working together, because that makes a lot of sense, because you know, the Nightmare on Elm Street film has always been about a group of kids getting killed off one by one, and it makes sense that you'd have all of them kind of bringing pieces of the puzzle together. And I like that it's a puzzle, and I like I like in principle that it is becoming more of a mystery, this movie, as they're trying to, right up until the end, they're like finding pieces and information kind of coming through. But it's just it's a real haphazard little like exposition dump that doesn't really have any sense to it, which could have come through a little bit more pragmatically, and a little bit more he's a bit too passive in it, you know, in something that he's actively doing, instead of it just kind of hitting him. I feel like that would have been it would have felt a little bit more earned, a little bit more kind of a bit more efficient, because we could have learnt more about him, instead of it being just a thing that happens to him and just strikes him. It could have been something that revealed more of his character, which you don't particularly. I mean, I feel like you get a lot more from kind of Johnny Depp's character. He's got so much more characterization than Quentin, who's, you know, I feel like a lot of the characters in this, a lot of the teen characters kind of suffer from that same kind of noughties, late 2000s kind of horror kids, where they're all kind of like very good looking. And that's kind of a big part of that's the major part of their personality, is that they're all attractive. Even the ugly, you know, the ugly ones are even, you know, good looking.
That's it. So so what I was going to touch on was, we were talking about the grittiness of it, and I'm all for grit, but I think, unfortunately, when it comes to this film, what we lose in that journey to go with the realistic approach to the setting and the sequences that unfold, is that we lose the dreamlike quality that was so great in the original, and this kind of weird translucent feel to the film, where you don't know what's real and you don't know what's dream. That's missing, and I think that's so integral to the series, the franchise, that that's where I was left a little bit sad about the journey and the approach that they took. Anyway, so I just thought I'd touch on that, and it was a big elephant in the room, which we're obviously going to get to when we come to the end of the discussion about Freddy himself. But as we pick up the narrative, so this is where Nancy and Quentin go back to the what was it, like their preschool? To kind of find out what they can about Kruger. So as you said, it's kind of picking up that investigative trail that they're kind of going on. And on the way, this is where Nancy actually falls asleep. She gets attacked by Freddy, and then Quentin wakes her up, and they discover that she pulled a piece of Freddy's sweater out of the dream world. So this is what they're touching on, you know, like the original, where you can potentially bring him into their world, not in the dream world. Quentin then takes Nancy to the hospital because she's got cuts on her arm, and he steals some adrenaline and a syringe to help them stay awake. And this is where she's doing the whole whiter than thou kind of thing, is like all innocence, proving that she's the virgin heroine that she should be in this. And And then Nancy and Quentin then leave the hospital, and eventually they get to the preschool. So we're getting to the climax of the movie, essentially. This is where Quentin is actually that discovers the magic cave, and the evidence then proves that Kruger was physically and sexually abusing all the children. So he was a molester. Nancy decides, so the only way to actually kill this guy is to, pull him out of their dreams and kill him in their real world. And so this is where she says, Quentin, you stay awake long enough, and I'll pull him back from my dream. And she goes to sleep. She has the encounter with Freddy, and but obviously it's Quentin that falls asleep instead, and he's the one that gets attacked. Kruger then goes after Nancy, believing Quentin to be dead. Goes after Nancy, and he basically explains to her that he intentionally left her for last so she could stay awake long enough, so she would never be able to wake up, because he's always liked her. She's been her. She is his favorite, as the mum had said. And there's a big kind of confrontation. Nancy struggles with Freddy. At which point, Quentin then wakes up, and he is okay, it seems, and he uses the adrenaline he's brought with him to bring Nancy back. And at this point, she pulls Freddy into the real world. And then with Kruger distracted, Quentin and Nancy use a broken paper cutter blade thing that they get in the preschool things, and they cut off Freddy's gloved hand, and then they slice his throat with it. And then that's where Nancy then torches the room, basically sets it on fire with Kruger's body left inside. And then Quentin and her leave the preschool and go home to where Mum is. And then Nancy is told that she should get some sleep, because she's just come from the hospital. That's right, to kind of get bandaged up again. Have some sleep, and that's when Kruger then appears in the mirror reflection, and he kills Nancy's mum before pulling her body through the mirror this time, rather than through the glass doorway as Nancy screams. Close credit. So I know we kind of rushed through that a little bit, but yeah, so did the film. So in fairness, all right, so that's the gut of the piece. That's the journey they went through. A lot of kind of, like you said, lots of like more thriller-based kind of investigative journey that Nancy goes through in this one to get to the end result, just to prove that Freddy was darker than we could possibly imagine. But what is the upshot of doing that, of lifting that veil and showing the darker side of Freddy first? I will pose that question to you.
Well, I mean, I don't see the upside. Once you kind of realize that, you're like, I don't want to see a sequel to this. Whereas with the final one, you're like, oh man, like him pulling the mum through and them in the car. You're just like, oh, he's back. Like what a kind of fun, chaotic, kind of cruel and twisted kind of charismatic killer. And it is because I really like this actor. I really loved him in Shutter Island, and of course in Rorschach in Watchmen. I thought he was really great. I thought he's probably the best thing in Watchmen.
That's right,
But that kind of darkness, and they keep on pulling this. It's this kind of like this. You feel you are kind of sucker punched into it, where they kind of tell you, like, oh, he was an innocent man, which I think is actually way more interesting.
It is actually
of a twist. Of him like being someone who was caring for these kids and was murdered by their parents because he was thought to be something even monstrous, and in doing so, the parents created the monster that they feared.
That has a I agree with you. It has a slight. I mean, yes, it makes him a little bit. I don't know, but then, okay, if you want to go into the psyche of somebody, that maybe is a more interesting journey to have somebody that is initially innocent and what would turn an innocent person to go dark would be an interesting line. But then, again, you're going into the whole kind of saying too much about a character that should just be.
Yes, which is the ultimate issue with this is that, like, the mystery stuff I think is really great if it was just about someone else.
Yeah.
Not with Freddy Krueger, who we've been with for 6, 7, 8 movies. We've been it's a hell of a lot of films, and we've seen him a whole lot. So the film isn't really subverting our expectations of Freddy.
No.
It's kind of playing it in a way of like, you don't know who this guy is. We're like, we know, we know Freddy. And the fact that their big reveal is that, oh, actually he was a monster. Like, what? Why is that a surprise?
Yeah. And he's supposed to. Yeah.
It's not surprising because we know he is a monster. It would just work so much better with some other killer, some other new original kind of thing. But obviously that was never going to happen.
Yeah. So the other thing, obviously, like as I said, the red hair, the big elephant in the room is that with Jackie. We were talking about Jackie now. He's got anybody knows that they've got big shoes to fill, stepping into the role of Robert Englund, basically, who played Freddy before, and Robert Englund's so synonymous with the role of Freddy, having played him for 7 odd installments or whatever it was. So, and the choice of going gritty again and dark is a bit of an Achilles heel in it of itself, because like he is. Robert Englund's portrayal is this larger-than-life kind of character.
Mm-hmm. He's the boogeyman.
He is the boogeyman, that's right. And that isn't in this. This is, like, very dark, and, we get the whole gravelly voice kind of, stuff going on. So it's... Which is cliche and tried, and, unfortunately, it kind of falls a bit flat on its face. So... this isn't
speaking, I kind of want to jump in on that. Speaking
go.
Of face, which we haven't even mentioned, is what do you think of the makeup?
Do you know what's funny? Like, and I wish I kind of looked this back up again, because it was somebody, as we mentioned at the beginning, like it just recently celebrated 10 years, and I'm on a lot of these horror kind of social sites, kind of trying to keep my finger on the pulse, the bloody pulse, that is. And somebody, I had to laugh. Somebody mentioned that the look of Freddy in this looked like an inbred cat from the musical Cats. And after I read that, I couldn't get that image out of my head of actually that's how he looks. He's got this very kind of feline features that just looks like it's maybe an inbred cat that's been burnt really heavily. But I was just also looking then as well, as we were chatting, about the prosthetics that was used in the filming of this as well, because apparently it was a lot of this stuff was put together to kind of make it look a bit seamless and designed to look like an actual burn victim. And CGI was just used on portions of his face, like on his cheek area, for example, to make it look like it was open. But then they had done that before. Like there was, I forget which installment it was, but one of the Freddys in the past, the guy actually, I want to even say it could have been Greg Nicotero, but I could be wrong, actually studied burn victims. And that's how he came up with the look of Freddy in that particular film. So it's not like it's not been done before, but it looked a bit plasticky. from memory, not, which is again, you could argue that burn victims do have that look because of the stretch, kind of the way the skin kind of burns and stretches, has that look, to it. But yeah, I don't know, it just didn't sit with me. How about you?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really think about the whole cat thing, but absolutely, particularly looking at an image of it as we speak, it's kind of shocking. I think a really big part of it is that with this makeup, you really lose his eyes. His eyes are kind of really shut.
They are.
One of them
close.
is slightly open, and the other one is like quite close because they're going for that gritty realism. Whereas such a big part of Robert Englund is those eyes, like in all of them.
Yes,
it's those piercing eyes that are so like whether he's going for the comedy or whether he's going for the horror, like they were always such wonderful weapons of his.
Yeah.
Whereas this one you just kind of lose a lot of it, and the voice isn't just gravelly; it's like artificially gravelly.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
they've kind of played with it. Whereas like I'm sure you say, of course, you're going to do that. You're going to make him scary, it's a little cliche. It's like he's a good enough actor that he can create that with his voice. Like he doesn't need that extra stuff.
No.
That's why you've gotten him to do the job.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not really a fan. Every time I kind of look at it, I'm just kind of like, I don't really like looking at it.
Yeah.
Whereas the other Freddy, I've for them even the ones that I'm less kind of enjoying, they're always kind of, they're separate. I don't want him to look like a real burn victim. That's like that's sad. Like which if you go along that kind of route and make him a more sympathetic person, if you're going to do that, then that I guess would play into it. But he's not. He's a monster. He should be like more extreme. Why should he just look like the way that he died? He's invading people's dreams. Shouldn't he be something more? Shouldn't it be exaggerated like it would be in a dream?
That's right. Yeah, good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, realism and Nightmare on Elm Street do not particularly mix. They're kind of the antithesis of one another. It's dream logic that we're after for this. It's those things where you're like, I'm at my grandma's house, but it's not my grandma's house. Yes. It's like, it's that kind of, that's what some of my favorite things in the series have always been. Of where it's captured those eerie, and this movie isn't eerie. It's not.
And I agree with you. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's that dream logic that's not present in this, which is ironic because that's essentially what it's about, So yeah, it's a very, very a strange approach to take in that mix. And the other thing I will add before we probably kind of start looking at bowing out is with Freddy is that he, compared to the other slashers, it's all about personality. The Michael Myers, the Leatherfaces, and the Jasons are devoid of personality. They're just killing machines, right? So, and this is where Freddy has always stood out from the pack because he's about presence, he's about persona, and he doesn't have that in this version. We don't really get to see that side of him. And not that he's devoid of personality, it's just a very different personality. And I think, didn't work either. And that's why I think it's always going to be hard to do a remake or a re-envisioning of the Nightmare on Elm Street films without England playing that, unless you get somebody very similar skill set, who is a bit of a character actor that can portray that. I don't know anyone off the top of my head, so I can't, even begin to tell you anyone. But I just think it's just not going to marry. I mean, I said that we'd look at that at the beginning. Like, can you see another Nightmare on Elm Street happening. They keep talking about it, but what do you think? Do you think we will see another Freddy again, or?
I think it's inevitable, particularly with the success of with the recent Halloween.
Yeah.
That just smashed it. And you know what? I'm looking forward to Blumhouse giving it a crack.
Yeah.
Particularly after watching Invisible Man, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, me too.
It's like Blumhouse puts out the crap that keeps the wheels spinning, and then they really, they give us a Get Out, they give us a Invisible Man. And they did Halloween as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. That was them. Yeah.
I think they get the right. They know how to find the right people who really want to tell these stories.
Yeah.
And find the right way in. And whether it's you get someone who's as charismatic as Robert Englund, which I think you just need. I know he's not a contemporary, but it's kind of like younger Tim Curry. It's I could you need someone who kind of is commanding of the space.
Yeah.
Who and I no one kind of jumps off the top of my head for who that could be.
No, same.
But maybe you just put him all in shadow. Maybe you do not see him.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't see him as much as and you put him way more in the shadow. You put him kind of as a part of things, and you never see his true face. I don't know. I think there is a way for it, and I'm definitely not a purist in terms of like you can't touch that because we've watched all of them. Like they kept on doing it. Like it is not a sacred cow.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's true.
I'm looking forward to seeing what their attempt is.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see whoever kind of leads the charge with that and what they do with it and where they end up, because I think obviously at the moment the testament's going to be with the new Halloween film, Halloween Kills, when that comes out, because obviously Halloween was a big benchmark for them. But what they do with that franchise, I mean, obviously they've got a plan because there's 2 more coming out. So, but there's going to be a lot more eyeballs on this next one than there was, even though there was a lot on it to begin with. There's going to be even more kind of wanting to see where they're going to go with it. So it will be interesting. Like the only other one that just on that note as well is that they are redoing The Craft. That is Blumhouse as well, which has, again, probably falls into your domain of that kind of early 2000s kind of, horror kind of teen slasher stuff. So it'll be interesting to see what they come up with that. I know that's in a slightly different realm to what we're talking about now, but it's still a remake.
The same kind of, their whole idea of which I think is really phenomenal, of not giving these filmmakers a lot of money, these movies being really small scale. I think that's incredibly smart.
Yes.
Instead of spending 50, 60, 80,000 on a horror film, which should never be done.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so obviously our gut reaction, or our final reaction really on this, is that this was a big miss on the part of the franchise. And I think we kind of hinted at that early on. Having said that, where do you place this in the franchise? We've gone the whole journey now. Like where would you place this film? Is it that bad that it's at the bottom, or is it not as bad as some of the misfires from the original franchise movies?
That's kind of tough.
Yeah. That's why I'm here. I'm asking the tough questions. Yeah.
Turning the screws.
Yeah.
As much as it'd be kind of near Final Nightmare and Dream Child for me.
Yep.
But I think, Dream Child at least is like, both of those movies are just insane, and I feel like that puts them over this one.
Yeah.
They're so just they're so loony.
Yeah.
And just kind of like crazy in a way that no other movie kind of has been.
Yeah.
Whereas this movie is a kind of shitty that lots of movies have been.
Yes, it's true. I like your approach there and deduction because I agree with it. I think unfortunately you're right. At least the two that you mentioned have their own personality in their own right, and that's why they probably are slightly better films, even though they're not great films. Essentially, if that makes sense. That would suggest that we're saying this one's at the bottom of the pack, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Are we kind of old? Oh wow! Yeah, on that sour note, cool. Look, regardless, I've enjoyed the journey that we've had talking about these films. We've gone from the original. We've gone from the really stand out. They're very different from the rest of the franchise. Number 2, Freddy's Revenge, before the iconic Dream Warriors and Dream Master that followed it, and then the 2 that you mentioned, Dream Child and Freddy's Dead, to probably still one of my favorite films as far as satire and kind of whole. It's still ahead of its time now, which was Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I'm a huge fan of that film, and obviously we had the Freddy versus Jason kind of matchup, which you guys can listen to as well, because we got our great friend and fellow podcaster Miles Davies on board, who joined us on a Jason kind of discussions from previous episodes. If you haven't checked that out, go back and have a little natter of what we thought of that one as well. Before we kind of bowed out with this remake. So it's the time will tell whether or not Kevin Bacon does kind of get called in to play the role of Freddy, which was touted around a couple of years back. I do know that the rights have gone back to the Wes Craven estate, so it'll be interesting to see what does come out of it. And maybe they are the sort of people that will listen to the likes of Blumhouse. Time will tell. Until then, thanks for coming in and listening to our kind of discussions as we kind of dissected this one. I'm your host, as always, for the podcast. My name is Saul Murte. Joining me for the Nightmare on Elm Street discussions, and I do thank you for joining us on this journey, was Oscar Jack. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
Okay, and on that note, sleep well. Good night.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.